Good morning once again. My name is Erwin King, the General Co-Chair of the Web Conference 2020 in Taipei. I will be chairing the first keynote session, and by Professor Gill. Professor Gill mentioned that it has been about 10 years since she attended the web conference. So I'm very excited and delighted to have her back again to the conference series. So let me introduce her before her talk. Dr. Yolanda Gill is the Director of Knowledge Technologies at Information Sciences Institute of the University of Southern California, and Research Professor in Computer Science and in Spatial Sciences. She is also Director of the USC Center for Knowledge-Powered Interdisciplinary Data Science. She received her MS and PhD degrees in computer science from Carnegie Mellon University, with a focus on artificial intelligence. Her research is on intelligent interfaces for knowledge capture and discovery, which she investigates in a variety of projects concerning scientific discovery, knowledge-based planning, and problem solving, information analysis and assessments of trust, semantic annotation and metadata, and community-wide development of knowledge bases. Dr. Gill collaborates with scientists in many domains on semantic, workflow, and metadata capture, social knowledge collection, computer-mediated collaboration, and automated discovery. She is a fellow of the Association for Computer Machinery, ACM, and past chair of its special interest group in artificial intelligence. She is also fellow of the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence, AAAI, and was elected as its 24th president in 2016. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Gill to give us a talk on embedding the scientific record on the web toward automating scientific discovery. Professor Gill.
Thank you very much, Erwin. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak. I am very sorry that I'm not in Taipei. And even though it seems that we are all disconnected and scattered all over the globe, I have to say that in this pandemic era, I have never felt more connected to everyone else in the planet. And so I hope that you all and each of you feel that way. And I've seen so far in the conference that the organizers have done an incredible job at helping us feel included and present in the conference. So to them, I would like to toast with a Taiwan tea that I have that I really like. It's called Tung Ting. It's oolong tea from Taiwan. It's one of my favorites, and I've been drinking it for years. I think maybe 5 or 6 years. I really like it, and I want to toast to you with some tea from Taiwan. Thank you very much. So I want to talk about embedding the scientific record on the web. It's very interesting to me, in particular as an AI researcher, because I would really like to see AI systems contribute to making scientific discoveries. And I think when you think about science and the web, we have to think about the origins of the web and how it came about, and the fact that it's been a driver, science has been a driver for the web from its inception at CERN. But actually, any advances that we make in terms of helping science on the web will have an impact on many other areas. So health, well-being, social justice, government, education, and also commercial innovation. So throughout this talk, I hope that you connect with the ideas and with the concepts that I will be discussing. I want to tease you with a sneak peek of an idea that I'm going to come and revisit at the end, which is the idea of computational knowledge graphs, which incorporate a notion of computers actually making inferences actively to relate different variables of interest or different available data to generate new inferences. So I think a lot about science as a huge network of computations and objects and variables that I call the computational knowledge graph. And I think that in the future, these will become more ubiquitous in science on the web. And I hope that in all these other areas that I mentioned, like education, industry, innovation, etc. So I want to start talking about innovation and scientific discoveries, just to think a little bit in that arena. So as you know, I like this graphic very much because it tells us that science has been really needing the web for a long time, from the time that scientists stopped publishing on their own and doing work on their own, very much in isolation, thinking for many months, to co-authoring and collaborating to generate new discoveries. And so that has been requiring scaling up not just the amount of people involved in science in a particular science project, but also the rate and the pace of communication that is required. And I think that the web has always offered a substrate for communication and collaboration across scientists that has been very fundamental. So when I look to the future and the challenges of our generation, understanding the brain, understanding very complex diseases in the brain, the evolution of the human body, understanding the complexities of our planet, our ecosystems, and the physical world, I think that understanding these very complex systems of systems will continue to require scaling up that ability to collaborate. And so I would like not only to have the web as a substrate to support that collaboration and communication, but actually I would like machines to be active partners in science. And that's what this talk will be about. So one of the things that we have to realize is that the bottleneck for us to have new discoveries, we are in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic, the bottleneck for us to making new discoveries is really our ability to plow through data, to get things done, to do a lot of things that we do manually in science. There's times to have novel ideas and there's times to actually do work. And those are things that we do very much manually. And there's actually a lot of human limitations that make us make progress in science at a limited pace. So I want to show some examples here just to highlight. So humans tend not to be very systematic. So I show an example from work from Shannon Peters and others, where they automatically extracted from many papers facts about the fossil record. And they did this automatically and compared it with a manual extraction task that took about 10 years for some geoscientists to do. And so if you look at the graph on the right, in red is all the facts that the geoscientists extracted manually, and in black are all the facts that the system extracted automatically. I was really surprised by this because I thought that surely a manual process of extracting all these facts would do much better than our very inaccurate text extraction tools, but in fact it didn't. So humans are not necessarily very systematic in the way that we do tasks. We also tend to do errors. So I cite a piece of work from a student at the University of Massachusetts that was trying to reproduce work done by two professors at Harvard, economics professors, talking about national level economic indicators, and he couldn't reproduce the results and actually found that they forgot to include a few of the countries that were important to the analysis. So we make a lot of errors unintentionally that actually harm the way in which we can make progress in science. I also think that humans, we are very biased. So I cite a study here of an AI system that analyzed data from past climates and actually proposed several hypotheses that were not in the literature. And so when they checked with the authors of other analysis, the authors simply said, yeah, I just like my hypotheses better. And the hypotheses that the computer was proposing were perfectly plausible. It's just that as humans, we tend to go towards we have certain biases on the hypotheses that we prefer. Also, as humans, we do pretty poor reporting. I think that most of you may have heard about the challenges in reproducing research just from reading papers, and many of us have actually gone through those exercises and found it tremendously difficult. It's very hard to report on the work that we've done in such precise way that others can really build on it. And then finally, we have cognitive limitations, we have time limitations, we have a life in addition to our research. And so the expertise that we have is always scoped and it's always siloed. And so the diagram that you see with all the colors on the right really shows us that in proteomics, on the right are all kinds of laboratory methods. On the left are all kinds of computational methods. And if you walk into any proteomics lab, they will pick a few, they will pick a sprinkle of all of these topics. And that's what they specialize in any given lab. So we're not very comprehensive. We cannot cover every possible kind of expertise needed. So as humans, we have to acknowledge this and realize that we are not necessarily the best performers of science. At the same time, we are incredibly creative, and I will come back to this at the end of the talk. But I want to just highlight that computers really would be able to contribute tremendously to a lot of science problems in ways that we find are limiting by humans. So there's been a long history in AI, in cognitive science, in the philosophy of science, and in science itself, in terms of automating scientific discoveries. What are the mechanisms that scientists use to exchange knowledge, to understand data, to create new theories, to evolve the general way to look at a problem and do some creative invention of a new framing of problems and so on. So there's a long history of this for many years. These are some recent results that show how science is being affected by incredibly powerful AI techniques, from optimization, from natural language processing to machine learning, and also in knowledge representation. So these are just a sprinkle of just to remind you that this is happening in science. But I'm going to focus very much on the knowledge area, because I think that on the web, this is where we flourish, where we allow the exchange of information and the collaboration that results from it. So if you think of science in that way, as a business of exchanging knowledge, of integrating and synthesizes knowledge, the web is a perfect place to embed the scientific record. It's open, it's accessible, it's fragmented, it can be piecemeal, it's modular. So I want to talk a little bit about embedding the scientific record on the web and think about what that means. So when we think about science, we think about maybe an example like the one I'm showing. This is a hydrology model. It looks at all of these different grid cells where the water can go when it rains, evaporation, transpiration, infiltration. And it's really the knowledge is governed by physical laws and simplifications of how the physics might work, so that we can build models that are computationally executable. And so the physics knowledge, the scientific knowledge, is very complex and very comprehensive here. And I think that, at least at this moment in time, we are being a little bit more modest. We don't want to necessarily capture all these physics laws on the web. I want to point out that even though that knowledge is embedded in our computations or in our systems, when we put scientific knowledge on the web, we focus more on the interchange and the use of knowledge and the integration of knowledge. So we focus more on standard data formats. We focus more on what are the variables that we're measuring, and are two different systems or sensors or models measuring the same variable. We focus about the constraints of when can I use this particular hydrological model? Can I use it if the mountain's very steep? Can I use it in a more plain place? So the constraints for use, what parameters can I adjust? What decisions does it help me make? Should we build a dam here or downstream? What assumptions it has, how you map the variables to other models. So it's more to do with the modularity and the compositionality and the integration of knowledge. So that's the kind of scientific knowledge that I will be considering. And of course, you know about all this work on semantic web representations, RDF, OWL, where we have a lot of different ontologies, we have a lot of different data sources that are described in these terms. And on the left, I show an example from Bio to RDF, looking at how to integrate knowledge from many different sources. The gene ontology was one of the pioneering ontologies in science to really enable this kind of integration across different sources on the web. Wikidata has flourished into an amazing tool to do research and to do science. So it has a very easy way to understand how the IDs from different distributed resources map to each other, the core properties of genes and many other scientific objects, publications, etc. And then I show also an example from Open Facts that really focused on what kinds of queries we can resolve by integrating many different resources, not just about properties of a certain protein, but also about chemical pathways and other things. So there's been a lot of work on putting ontologies and linked data on the web that has been incredibly instrumental for science. I want to also mention the publication of additional kinds of science products. So it's not just about a gene or an object or maybe a paper that is rendered on the web as a web object, but also the idea of publishing results from scientific research. So nanopublications, where any kind of assertion like this gene is associated with this disease has supporting information and attribution for how the idea or the result came about. There's also a lot of work on research objects, putting together everything that is related to a particular science project. So from the data to the software to the workflow to the slides and to the resulting paper and maybe many other things into a well-connected package. So putting science knowledge on the web sometimes has to do with these interlinking of the ideas and the pieces in the knowledge on the web. So I want to spend some time in the core of the talk sharing with you our experiences and our work on capturing scientific knowledge throughout the years, throughout several projects, and the scientific knowledge is of different kinds, all of it aiming to enable these integrations, interconnections, and putting more and more of the scientific record on the web. So this is kind of an overview and a guiding slide. I will be reusing it and showing you a project and then another project that we worked on where we were able to explore a different type of knowledge that we were using. So I'm going to start on the left with crowdsourced vocabularies. So here the idea is, can we develop new vocabularies for science, new metadata vocabularies, new common vocabularies for science using the web as our substrate? So what we did is we worked with paleoclimate researchers. You see on the left that they drill cores through the crust of the earth, or sometimes they drill ice cores. And they take this course and they look at what happened hundreds or maybe thousands of years ago. And so if you drill sediments from the ocean or you drill ice, you look at different properties of that core. You're measuring different things about the climate hundreds of years ago. So they don't have a common vocabulary, and it takes a lot of work to do that. So what we did is set up a mechanism for them to do controlled crowdsourcing, where if I'm describing ice cores and I want to talk about the size of the air bubbles in the ice, I can propose that as a property that I'm measuring in my data, while somebody else that's measuring something in the ocean proposes a different property. And then other scientists can reuse those properties if they wish. And then we had a layer of editorial oversight, very much like you see in Wikipedia, for example, where editors will help the community converge. And so this effort resulted in a new standard for paleoclimate data that required only one meeting. This is the initial meeting where they agreed to collaborate on this. Everything else happened online. So I know of very few standards where, a lot of the work happens actually through just interacting with your data and interacting on the web. There's no meetings involved in this kind of effort. So this was quite remarkable. And what I want to show you is that I think that this is a very powerful area for us on the web to help scientists connect terms, to connect different ways to look at the same phenomena and help converge on properties. We did this with a lot of care to the technical aspects of it, and how did we maintain an ontology that was consistent and usable. But also on the right, I show you that we took a lot of care with respect to the scientists themselves, recognizing their contributions, giving them the space to express their thoughts or their objections to anything, etc. So the human component is very important. So the result of this was a linked Earth ontology. And I want to also recognize and highlight here how much it helped this community that we didn't start from scratch, that we really looked at a lot of ontologies that were already out there. So schema.org data sets, geospatial ontologies, sensor ontologies, Provenance, Dublin Core for publications, and basically extended those in a very principled way, so that when they were populating with some details, it was very clear if something was observed in their sample or inferred through some method or hypothesis that they were expressing. And so once the core distinctions are made, then the crowdsourcing really worked. So if you're interested in this kind of approach to grow ontology standards for any area, I think that it's a very powerful thing to do. In science, almost everywhere where I look, you see a scientist that says, I wish we had a standard for this, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I just want to work with my data. So this is a byproduct of working with your data in a much more collaborative and open way on the web. So we use Wikidata to describe a lot of common entities in our vocabularies. We're big fans of Wikidata. I won't talk very much about it today. I want to talk about software and models in a project that we had called OntoSoft that also led us to an ontology to describe scientific software from the point of view of a scientist. What matters to a scientist? So we worked on this with a lot of young scientists that wanted to describe their software. They don't want it described as a computational object. They want it described as a scientific object. And so we looked at a lot of different dimensions, from understanding what the software does and how it works, to understanding how to use it for my experiments and my problems, and to be able to benefit from upgrades to it. So this resulted in an ontology called OntoSoft, where we really were able to track properties of software that scientists care most about, the software that they produce, not the software infrastructure that they use, but the software that they create. So models, conversion routines, any kind of scientific software that they write. So all of this, of course, creates a ton of opportunities for distributed operations and generating a lot of different communities and different groups that describe their software. So we have a very distributed infrastructure. Every community has their own knowledge graph, but they can find software that other communities have included in Ontasoft, and so they can understand it and reuse it if they want. I want to talk a little bit about provenance and then about process and workflows. So provenance in science, of course, is very important because it tells us how we derived a new result. So from the early days of the open provenance model that was spearheaded by Luc Moreau and others, we worked together on a very core way to describe provenance relationships between a result and all the processes and entities that were involved in generating it. Over the years, we worked, probably many of the group that worked in the open provenance model, but also many others, on a provenance ontology at W3C that became a recommendation, the Prov standard. And so it's very, very widely used. So something that came from really trying to describe scientific results had an impact on the standard for provenance on the web. The standard is actually, the core of it is pretty simple and really focuses on entities that are generated through a process that has specific activities. And then there's agents that are participating in some way in those processes and doing the generation of these entities. And provenance always refers to things that have been created already. So it talks about the past. It talks about things that have already happened. So every entity has a time when it's created, and every activity has a time interval where it's active. And so we've been publishing provenance as linked data on the web for a long time, describing pretty complex provenance records and making them available as repositories that can be mined. For example, to find common patterns of use of steps. So what are the common activities that this community uses, and do they create maybe sub workflows or patterns of use of those activities? So provenance mining is a very powerful thing to understand how organizations work and what are interesting macro activities that emerge. So from provenance, I want to talk about the methods and the processes that lead to those provenance records once they are executed. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. So here's 3 different ways to describe a scientific method or a method. In this case, is something very simple like counting the words in a file. So on the left is a very, very high level reusable template that simply says, if you give me a data set, a text document, then I'll run a stemmer algorithm that removes the morphological endings of the words. And then I will sort and count the number of occurrences of every word. In the middle is an instance of that general template. So instead of saying we'll just use some stemmer algorithm, we're actually identifying the Lovin stemmer as a particular algorithm that we'll use, and quicksort as the particular algorithm for sorting that we will use. And then finally on the right is the actual execution, where we can say it started at this time, it ended at this time, it was executed in this place, and the result actually exists. So by having this distinction between the template, the instantiation to a specific algorithm, and then the execution, we have a much richer way to look at that process. We have a much richer way to check compliance, to be able to reuse the template or the instance, because the provenance and the execution is not always as reusable because it is so specific to that particular run. So this gives us a very rich way to describe processes. And so we are able to describe generic provenance using Prov. We also use OPM. It's a richer language. But we also can describe the general plans. We created a language called P-Plan that extends Prov to be able to describe generic routines and generic processes, and then be able to describe executions and templates in terms of a language that we developed called OPMW, and it's an ontology that allows us to describe workflows in particular. So generic provenance, it can be any kind of process to describe a result. Plans are a little bit more specific in terms of what activities they require, and workflows are even more specific because they're talking about computations and not, for example, laboratory plans that involve physical actions. So with these languages and tools, what we did is create an ecosystem of workflow systems that have very, very different functionality, but through this web substrate of integration and communication, creating repositories of workflow executions, workflow templates, workflow instances. And each one of the gray ovals in this figure is a workflow system with very different functionality. And there's 9 different functionalities. They were created by 6 different research groups. They are very, very different in nature. And each result generated by one is consumed by 2 or 5 other systems. So this is a quite rich demonstration of information exchange in different workflow tools. We use those representations that I mentioned. So let me give you a flavor. Some of these tools were doing workflow generation. Others were simply doing workflow execution. Others were visualizing the provenance of a result from executions. Other tools were doing browsing of workflows and search. Others were mining workflow traces using workflow templates as potential abstractions to generalize from the traces, and others were offering documentation of workflows. So these are very, very different tools. And so what we were able to do is take workflow output from one tool and have it consumed by many others. So this is a very powerful demonstration, I think. And what I want to show you here is that having a repository on the web that actually accommodates different standards and different levels of abstraction, different levels of detail, actually allow different tools to query that repository through those different vocabularies to extract different views on the same information. So this is a very powerful lesson that we learned, that the more languages that we accommodate, the more ontologies or models that we accommodate, the more tools that we can serve, because they'll have a different view or different requirements on how they want the information and what information they want in the first place. So the workflows are published as web objects using linked data principles. I just want to show you this diagram because it really has this rich, many layers of rich information about the processes and the steps involved in the workflows. So this slide just gives you a pointer to the ontologies that we use and how we actually build on those standards to be able to create richer descriptions and publish them on the web for workflows. Workflows start to look to me like these computational knowledge graphs that I was talking about at the beginning. So stay with me and I'll come back to that in a few minutes. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the idea of using hypotheses to drive data analysis. And so, sorry. This is moving, to use hypotheses to guide data analysis. So workflows tell us, this is analysis that we can do, but what kind of science question are they designed to follow? So we've done quite a bit of work on a system called DISC that takes user hypotheses and starts to work through this process of, if I have this hypothesis, what kind of data do I need? And how can I analyze that data? What there may be different kinds of data that I could collect. And so from a hypothesis, we trigger a line of inquiry that tells us what's the query that I want to make to data repositories or to describe the data that I want. And then what kinds of workflows can I use to analyze them, and how can I combine results? So from that hypothesis, I have these revised hypotheses that can be a lot more precise, but also I can have some level of confidence based on the type of data and the type of analysis that I did. And so we have developed a language to describe hypotheses. There's a few languages for hypotheses out there, but we focus very much on the statement of the hypotheses to have a qualifier that tells us how the hypothesis was created, to collect evidence that tells us how the hypothesis was executed. The confidence that we have in it is a qualifier. And then also its evolution. So as new data becomes available in our system, it triggers a new analysis. And so it will revise the hypothesis. So you can imagine on the web, systems that are constantly lurking, and they know what goals they have, they know what hypotheses they want to analyze. And as new data becomes available, they can revise these hypotheses by triggering analysis. So this is a very exciting project. What I want to show is that we actually developed an ontology for describing these hypotheses that's also available. And we published that hypothesis description as an extension of the workflows themselves, so that we can describe what was the point of doing a certain analysis and why was that workflow picked. I want to talk a little bit about one last thing, which is some more recent work that we've been doing, and it involves interventions, decision making, and trying to understand how to make decisions based on science data analysis. So this is part of the MINT project, where we're looking at how to integrate models across different disciplines. So if you're looking at water availability in a state, it depends on the agriculture that requires that water, the industrial setup in the region, the amount of population, depends on the economics of all of those aspects in the region. And so you have to integrate many different models, and this is a complex problem. And what I want to tell you about is, if you look at any single one of these models, for example, an agriculture model, it's going to have, in the picture in the middle, just like I showed you earlier with the hydrology model, it's going to have many science principles and scientific theories about how the biology of these plants work. But we are trying to encapsulate all of that knowledge and expose the things that you would care about to make decisions. So what kind of interventions can I make in this system? I can choose how much fertilizer, I can choose planting dates, I can choose weed fractions. What parameters can I change? And then what are the responses that I can get? And everything else gets hidden into this computation that the method is doing. So exposing the right things to the outside and making them available as web variables, part of the variables that the model is set up to analyze, is our goal. So to represent the context of why we are running a workflow, why we're doing an analysis, we're representing what am I trying to understand, what's the indicator, what's the result that I'm looking for, in this case, the crop production, what are the parameter settings that I'm using, but most importantly, at the bottom left, you can see that the interventions, what if you use different fertilizer rates, what if the farmers are available or not to pick the weeds, and so on. And so all of that is the decision-making context and the physical world's variables that we are trying to understand and to explore in making these decisions. So if you're curious and interested and you have models of any kind, we have a software description ontology for models that really tries to expose decision and context, decision-making context about these models. That is very exciting. So one last point that I want to make is that all of these are ingredients of the business of science and scientific research. And so we've had for some time now an effort to write papers in a very different way. So we call this the Scientific Paper of the Future Initiative, and we're trying to convince scientists to make all of their ingredients in any paper, all of those components of research, their data, their software versions, their workflow, their provenance, the execution of the provenance available in their paper, so that when you are trying to understand a paper, you don't just have the paper itself, but you have this rich ecosystem of science resources. And so we continue to refine what that looks like, but I wonder if in a not so far future, we can actually have papers written in such a way that they're so structured that it's crystal clear what was actually done, and it's very easy to reuse pieces or to reproduce or to adapt what they did to my own data or my own methods. So I gave you this overview of all of the pieces that are part of scientific research that we want to become part of what a scientific paper is. We wish every scientific paper had this cloud of really interconnected hypotheses and questions and decision-making questions that we had, and the context, the workflows, the provenance, the objects, everything richly described. So that would put our scientific record really on the web to be mined, to be reused, to be shared, and to be integrated. So in doing all this work, I want to share with you near-term research challenges that I think are very important. And if any of you are working on these or are interested in these, I would love to hear about your work. I don't think that these research challenges are specific to science, but they certainly should be relevant if you work in other areas. So I come back to this idea that I proposed at the beginning of the talk of computational knowledge graphs. So these are knowledge graphs that don't just have objects and relationships, but they actually include some computational ability to make inferences about new variables or new data that we want to generate, that we're interested in. And so the structure of these graphs, they're not just variables, they can be observed measurements or observed variables, and also inferred. They're connected through computational nodes that may connect several variables. And the inference would use any data about any of these variables to generate new data. The inferences could go any way. So you could have the computation could, given a result, tell you where it could have been generated or the other way around. There may be many alternative paths to getting a value. There may be paths that are really truly causal that you could discover through inference. And for usability reasons, you would want to know what are the best models if you have options, what are the best computations to use. You would want to know the provenance of new values and new data that you have generated. And then finally, you would want to have an idea of the value of the computation. So these knowledge graphs are a very important ingredient, I think, of putting all of these science findings, all of these science processes and results in context on the web. So I think augmenting knowledge graphs with computation is a really interesting and very, very challenging area of future work. Another area that's very, very important is being able to credit authors and to track the provenance in terms of the contributions that different authors are making. And this is not just for increasing somebody's reputation or ownership of something. It's really to understand, can I trust this data set? Have many people used it? Today, we just really don't have that kind of data. And it's the first thing that scientists will ask you. It hasn't been used before, and how, and by how many, and so on. And so I think it's very important to be able to credit and track authorship and the sources of any information. Another research challenge is identity. And I think in science, it's not just identity, but this is to look for equality and also similarity. So we want to know if you have two experiments that use the same data, is it really truly exactly the same data, or is it similar enough, or is it one of them has a little bit better quality because it has been cleaned a little bit? So in what way is the same data set? Then you may have two methods that use the same software. Is it really the same version or different, or is it really exactly the same method or not? And all the way to trying to understand if two methods were implemented in completely different ways, but they really follow the same general steps, or maybe they test very similar hypotheses, or maybe the same hypotheses, so that you should be able to combine the evidence that they produce. So being able to deal with these questions of identity, equality, and similarity of all of these science entities is very important research challenge. And then finally, generating explanations that help us track how the result was generated and understand it, especially if it's going to be a highly distributed web of software that lives in different repositories and workflows that came from different places. How do I understand this artifact? How do I understand how a new result was derived? And so it's not just about generating an explanation that walks you through the process, but really customizing the explanations to different user backgrounds. They may have different focus. I want to understand the general method versus I want to really understand the data that was used. And then maybe different levels of detail depending on their interest. Not everybody wants to see everything. And then finally, I think a research challenge that I'm very interested in is how do we automate paper writing? Can we do this? Can we say, here's all of these records that we've put on the web, and then have machines generate this nice narrative that would help others understand exactly what we did, and it describes the methods in a very correct and comprehensive way. So I think all of these are kind of, as I said, near-term research challenges. I want to spend a couple of minutes on some final reflections for this general area of research. So I bring you back to what we saw at the beginning, these very lofty challenges that we face in the world, at least in science. I give you here some examples. And when I look at these huge challenges, and I mentioned earlier how science becomes more and more this very collaborative activity that requires a lot of information exchange. So, for example, in the picture on the right, this is the Atlas experiment that had, I think their main publication had 4,000 authors. So imagine the amount of information exchange required. And one of the things that I wonder is what role will computers play in this science? So should they be able to automatically analyze some data? Should they be able to generate narratives of papers? Should they be able to pose hypotheses? What should they be doing? And so I get inspiration from the best chess players today. So there's something called advanced chess that Garry Kasparov proposed to look at what would make the best possible chess players. So on the left is the champion. It represents the team champion for what's called freestyle chess. So you can combine any human, any computer, you can make any kind of combination, and that's your team, that's the player. And so Kasparov writes that actually the best human players did not necessarily make the best teams, or the best computers did not necessarily make the best teams, but it was the best process, the best ways to decide when would you use a certain computer, when would you use another computer, when would the human make the next move, when would another human make the next move. And so understanding how to combine all the pieces together is the key to creating the best chess players. And so I've been thinking a lot about this, and this is a slide that summarizes my vision for what I think we need to do to create scientific partners for humans. And so I want AI systems that can actually collaborate with humans. And I mention this because this partnership assumes this networked substrate that is the web, all of the information that I just talked about. So they need to be able to have rationality and have their behavior governed by knowledge. They need to understand the context and the scope of their task. They need to have initiative to go to the web and learn new things as they are published and appear. And I don't mean just publish papers, but publish web objects and artifacts that are published on the web. Networking, so be able to access other sources or services or other capabilities. Being able to articulate persuasive justifications of why they approach the problem a certain way, being able to integrate with other systems, integrate capabilities, and finally being responsible in terms of saying what their limitations are. And so I see a lot of interesting things in the next 2 decades. So maybe AI will start reproducing previous work and then very soon become our assistant, and then at some point become our partner. That's really my hope. And I think the web is really fundamental to enabling this vision and to really tackle these complex science problems. I want to end by thanking many collaborators, in particular Varun Ratnakar, Daria Garijo, and Oscar Corcho, among many, many others that have shaped a lot of these ideas. And I guess I can take questions, Irwin.
Okay, thank you, Professor Joe. And we are going to ask the audience to type in questions, but it might take a few minutes. So maybe I'll begin by asking you a few questions to start this session. In ACN Communications, August 2019, there was an article on an industry scale knowledge graph, okay, lesson and challenges. And I think that this is very interesting because this is really a real life, whereas us, we are doing theoretical research, right? And they're really doing large scale industry strength and type of system. What do you see the disparity between the research community and also the industry right now? Are we converging? Are we diverging? Or what's your view? What are the grand challenges for the industry actually?
So that's a very, very good question. That article that you mentioned on knowledge graphs in industry is actually very interesting because it's the first time that I think we have seen from the point of view of the authors who were in different some of the largest tech companies, what they are doing with the knowledge graphs, how they are building them, what they are using them for, at least at a very high level. So one thing that I think is very, very important is that we continue to push for open knowledge content. So to me, the Wikidata effort is very significant because it does contain a very, very significant knowledge graph of entities of interest. All the knowledge is CC0 and openly available, and it is available to all of us. And so we need to continue to push those efforts and protect them from disappearing. I think also the industry has a lot more resources to push for a lot more things. for a lot more effort. So I think their pace can be a lot faster when you're building a knowledge graph for a new purpose or for a new type of information. But I think that what you see in academia and in research efforts outside of industry is these innovations and these explorations that you may not see in other places. So I started the talk talking about crowdsourcing ontologies and crowdsourcing metadata. So that's an absolutely new idea. I think is very important for the web to enable this, to create these agreements. And these kinds of ideas a lot of times come from academia. A lot of innovation comes from academia, and so I'm hoping that we will continue to create collaborations and synergies, and it helps a lot in academia that knowledge graphs have been scaled up and proven so successful in industry. So I think that it's a very useful kind of ecosystem for doing research and putting it to practice.
But let me just follow up on the question that I had. You talk about the scientific paper of the future, which I really love, because I think Michael Arbit many years ago talked about the brain notebook, and it's a very similar idea where you could actually have experiments where you could tune parameters real time in the research paper and linked up to all those things. But then it really goes back to the question I also asked. I think that there is a balance that we need to achieve, because one hand we need open data to do our research work, but on the other hand, the companies, they have private data. There are privacy issues, security issues. How much data do we actually need to do some of the, say, medical research without being offending the privacy and the security of a personal in a personal nature. So I see this tension. Would you like to maybe elaborate that a little more?
So I think we need ways to enable researchers in academia to create our own sources of data that right now only exist in industry. So I'll give you an example. Personal information, right?
Yep.
So our personal information is collected by specific siloed repositories that companies own, right? Can we create open standards so that in academia we can give you prototype systems that you can install, and you can share your data with researchers to help improve and create new personal applications. Without that data, this would not be possible. And so I think that in academia right now, we're lacking the access to a lot of data that you see very readily available in industry. This has created a lot of collaborations between academia and industry, but I think that there's some limitations to that we can overcome. Another idea that I really like to mention is hospitals, research hospitals that are really created from the get-go for innovation in research. So rather than coming to a hospital that's already set up with a certain way in which hospitals are always run, can we create hospitals that are really geared towards the data sharing and the data innovation? So I think we have to be creative moving forward with respect to data availability and data sharing. And yeah.
Okay. I have one question from the audience, and is a brief one. What is the difference between a computational knowledge graph and a workflow?
That's a very good question. So I think the computational knowledge graph is a generic structure that links to specific variables. Workflows tend to link data sets or files rather than specific variables. So here, I see a knowledge graph as saying, this is the height of this mountain, and this is the temperature at the top on this particular day, and this is the humidity. And so those are different variables that you're observing. Computational workflows, are always embedded in the particular file systems and particular file structures, but this is more about variables and facets and properties of objects and variables in the world.
Okay. Due to the time limitation, I think that we have to stop now. I really have a different feeling about this Zoom meeting because I feel like I'm talking to you one-on-one. And this is very private and very intimate. Whereas, you might have 1,000 of audience in the regular conference, but this is a very, very good way to also interact. So I really appreciate Professor Jill, and let's virtually just applaud and thank her. And thank you very much. And I hope that you all have a wonderful day today at the Web Conference 2020.
I look forward to interacting with you all through the app of the conference.
Yes,
throughout the
yes,
next.
you could actually use Hoover, I think, that you could still interact and interface with people around. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye. Bye.